Nigeria's crude oil production rose, with the country pumping about 70,000 barrels per day above its OPEC quota. It also saw OPEC oil output rise last month, and Nigeria boosted output above its target of 1.5 million barrels per day within the wider OPEC Plus group. Now, Nigeria's growing oil production means boosted revenues and a stronger foothold in the global energy market as the government's coffers swell, offering opportunities for investment in public services and the much-needed diversification of the economy. It could also mean the country may be able to fund its almost 55 trillion naira budget this year.
Well, it sounds like music to the ears. Let's bring in oil and gas expert Olabode Sowunmi. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
On
Always a pleasure
Newsnight. So, I mean, it offers opportunities for investment in public service and the much needed diversification of the economy and all of that. But what exactly does this mean in the bigger picture? Is it that OPEC is dropping the ball on market control? Or, I mean, is this, all of this happening 100% in favor of Nigeria?
Okay, so for context,
yes, please.
OPEC does put its quota.
Right.
Because the original intent for the organization is to ensure profitability for the member nations against the pressures that are coming from the Western nations and all that. And it has worked over the decades, which is why sometimes some countries refer to OPEC as a cartel. Not necessarily because they are like mafia, but because they find it difficult to break their influence. That's on one side. So the intention of OPEC, whichever way you look at it, is for the ultimate benefit of its member countries. However, the dynamics of oil has changed over the decades. There is more smaller finds of oil in smaller nations. There are some nations who have medium scale production, but who are not yet able to be members of OPEC. But also, there is hardly any nation in OPEC that does not produce a little bit above their quota. You need to recall that about 15 years ago, we were doing 2.5 million barrels per day, which is significant compared to this. So the reasons why we are not doing that are ours. Right. It's the restiveness, it's the pipeline vandalization, it's the whole shebang. So that's what takes us to that side. So in terms of the news, I mean, it's good news. Extra income any day is good news. Yeah. Whether the extra income translates to better life for the citizenry is a total different ballgame.
So, I mean, those internet issues you talk about, can we then confidently say they are things of the past? Because this is the second time consecutively that we have, exceeded OPEC output. Recall in January, we also did a bit above 1.5 million barrels. Now we're doing 70,000 more than that. What's responsible for this output we're seeing?
Okay, so I mean, the president and the stakeholders, particularly the regulator in this case, which is NUPRC, have repeatedly set targets among themselves. I think one of the things that is peculiar with the way this government has run its administration against others is that for agencies, they give them targets, which is quite like what happens in the private sector. In the past, government agencies are not used to targets. But for whatever be the case, they give them targets, and those CEOs, especially those who are nearing tenure renewal or who may have certain challenges, are motivated to hit those targets. So that's at the root of that. So for me, the motivation is more like there is this that the government wants to do. The regulator has been set the target. He in turn has got to meet the stakeholders and say, gentlemen and ladies, depending on where they're speaking to, that we have this target and we need to hit it. And because it is a homegrown target, it's grown from within them, they're able to touch the sensitive points in areas that they've not done before. As to specifics, the larger challenges, which is hindering the flow from in-basin production, that's onshore production, has significantly not been resolved. And there are many factors to it. There is the structure within the Niger Delta and South region in terms of who controls what. There is also the mentality of the people, which is now the culture that is ingrained in terms of how they look at national infrastructure, and there's issue of justice.
So the real
there's a
challenge
myriad of
is
issues.
to address the internal, rumblings or internal challenges.
Yes, I remember.
Regardless of what the external forces are. But what exactly are the implications for of having more than OPEC's quota, especially when you consider our benchmark? What was the oil benchmark, about 75? Or
for
so,
the budget
for
is 2.06 million barrels per day.
2.06 million barrels per day.
$75, I think,
dollars,
yes.
$75.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's something that can be discussed with OPEC. I'm not sure it's like it's a death canal, but typically, pending when they get the quota raise or something, I will imagine that there's a history in how these things are done. I'm not sure it's so much of a big deal like that.
There's not much of a downside that one needs to be concerned about.
That would be
envisage and quickly address.
Yeah, I'm sure those who are on that table. There's a governor for OPEC from Nigeria,
right,
who is representing that when they meet. Those issues are typically brought up, and there's a mechanism for resolving it. We are nowhere near where we should be. It is because of our inability to meet our target that our production quota was significantly reduced.
Okay, we have about 3 more minutes for this chat. We've seen international oil majors exiting Nigeria and leaving assets to locals to acquire. I'm wondering how much of that are we seeing as a factor in this increased production output? I mean, what do you make of the dynamics of more local firms acquiring assets?
So in the first place, no international company has left.
Where they're shifting their focus?
I wouldn't say they're shifting their focus. They are divesting. In other words, they are going to where the production is significantly higher. So typically for onshore wells, you could have like 100,000, 150,000. No, not 100, I mean maybe 50,000, 70,000. But when you go offshore, you could be talking about 300,000. So why would it make more sense as a company if we decide to leave the small cherries and go for the big pie? So it's personal choice, really. It is an lack of understanding of the issues that causes those kind of reportage, because so sometimes.
But we see the lack of Seplat and Owando.
Yes. So what has come in for them is significant opportunity to build local capacity. Even as at today.
Which is a good thing in itself.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, from the very first time, since the 90s, when Babangida offered the first license, it has built capacity in Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the nations that all over the world, in fact, one of the few African nations where we have local content able to do international service offerings. Nigerian companies are able to do work in Venezuela, in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, and in terms of capacity for oil and gas, there's no African nation.
So Nigeria is on course. Are you saying with the optics now that investors in the oil and gas sector will begin to, look in this direction?
Oh, very much so.
Because for some time now, there's been almost little or no investment in the oil
Very true.
sector.
Very true. If you check, and part of it has to do with the uncertainties which came with the fact that the PIB, which is now PIA, was not passed for a lot of years, close to 10 years. And to buttress the part, I mean, Shell recently announced about $5 billion investment. So that is going to trickle down in the next year, in the next few months to the next year, which means contractors are going to come in. A few people will earn $1 million. A few will earn, there's money that is going to go in. And
are you going to be part of the...
I pray so.
I just wanted to quickly build on a question I was asked earlier, because the Nigerian economy, as you know, depends largely on oil revenue, even though we sing the diversification song. We are seeing some increase in some service sector with the figures we're coming, but we're still beating far below our belt. And the question earlier about the target for the year 2025, the ambitious budget, 2.06 million barrels. We have seen this consecutive increase twice. Do you think it's wishful thinking that we're likely going to meet that target? Is it possible? Is it a reality?
So there are two types. There's the economic side, there's the technical side, the oil and gas side. In terms of the structure, because what it takes to meet it is the ability to be able to do your upstream work, get the get the stuff out of the ground, your midstream, transport it, and in terms of the structure for the value chain to do that, that exists. There are a few hiccups here and there. So in terms of can we do it? Yes. Will it be done? It's a different ballgame, and it is not dependent on one factor.
What will it take?
Like I said, it's not dependent on one factor. Some of the factors we've already discussed has to do with the people, has to do with infrastructure, has to do with, there are a number of issues. But I believe we should be optimistic that it will be done.
Is this cheaper fuel for Nigerians? Increased production? Yes.
Will it translate?
Not necessarily.
You see, because
why I say that is that the most significant factor for the price for Nigerians is the exchange rate.
All right. Thank you so much.
That counts for something.
Olabode Sowunmi, oil and gas expert. Thank you so much for being on the news tonight.